Hello, welcome back to our channel, where we explore the deepest and most terrifying mysteries of the world. Today, we have content that will chill even the bravest souls. Let's dive into real and supernatural stories full of mysteries, from real horror stories of towns and villages. These are tales of sinister shadows, evil presences, stalking and dark nightmares, kidnappings, and psychological terror, along with accounts of spirits that linger there and paranormal encounters that defy all logical explanations. Prepare yourselves to hear stories that will stir your mind and heart. From visions of spectral figures to frightening premonitions, these episodes will leave you questioning everything you think you know about life and death. If you dare, watch these stories that will make you ponder what exists on the other side. Watch and draw your own conclusions. Warning: these stories are real and were reported by people who experienced and witnessed these events. They may disturb the minds of sensitive people. They were sent in by viewers, so if you have a story you want to share, send it to us below. It could be featured on our channel. Story 1. One felt the weight of losing his wife like a constant shadow, always present, even as he tried to focus on his son Robert. They had been through tough times, and one decided they needed a fresh start, a place where they could rebuild their lives and leave behind painful memories. North Hill, a small town in the province of San Juan, Argentina, seemed like the ideal refuge. With its friendly population and picturesque setting, the town offered the peace and tranquility he longed for. But what Juan didn't know was that the town hid secrets as dark as the feelings he was trying to escape. From the moment they arrived, something about North Hill didn't seem right. Juan attributed this feeling to fatigue and the anxiety of being in a new place, but Robert, just 8 years old, seemed more sensitive to the surrounding environment. During their first walk through the town, Juan noticed his son looking suspiciously at the few people they crossed paths with. It was as if Robert felt he was being watched, as if the townspeople's eyes followed their every move, even though they appeared to be busy with their own lives. Nevertheless, Juan was determined to create a positive environment for Robert. In that first week, he tried to dismiss any negative thoughts, dedicating himself to turning the newly purchased house into a cozy home. They spent days setting up the rooms, exploring the surroundings, and even made some new friends at Robert's small local school. Gradually, Juan began to believe he had made the right choice. But then came that fateful night. It was a Saturday, and Juan had planned a special day for Robert. They decided to explore the village, visiting small shops, buying artisanal sweets, and even dining at a family restaurant that served local dishes. The town was quiet, almost too silent, but Juan ignored the occasional chills he felt, especially when he noticed the lingering stares of some residents. It was as if each smile, each greeting, hid something deeper, a shadow of something he couldn't decipher. The day passed, and as night fell, they returned home. Juan prepared a simple dinner, and the two sat down at the table. The conversation was light, filled with laughter as Robert excitedly talked about his new adventures at school and the few friends he had made. Everything seemed perfect until suddenly, Robert fell silent, staring intently at the dining room window. Juan followed his son's gaze, but saw nothing but the darkness outside. "What is it, son?" he asked, trying to hide the concern in his voice. Robert just shook his head, saying it was nothing, but Juan noticed that the boy was visibly uncomfortable. That night, after putting Robert to bed, Juan felt restless. A sense of discomfort invaded him, something he couldn't explain. He decided to check the doors and windows before going to bed, a precaution he usually didn't take. But that night felt different. It was as if something was watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. When he finally lay down, sleep didn't come easily, and the few moments of rest were disturbed by fragmented dreams filled with expressionless faces. The next morning, Juan woke up early, feeling more tired than when he had gone to bed. He got up slowly, still groggy, and went to Robert's room to wake him. But when he opened the door, the room was empty. The bed, untouched. Juan's heart raced as he searched the house, calling his son's name. But there was no response. He ran outside, looking for any sign of Robert. Perhaps the boy had decided to go out early to play with his new friends. But something inside Juan told him that wasn't the case. The feeling that something was terribly wrong grew with every second. Desperate, Juan went to the local police station. The reception he received was cold and disinterested. The officers seemed more concerned with finishing their coffees than with helping him. "Kids disappear all the time," one of them said, with a tone of disdain. "He's probably out there having fun. Go home, he'll show up." Juan was stunned by the indifference of the authorities. How could they be so insensitive? How could they ignore the anguish of a father who had just lost his son? With no other option, Juan decided to investigate on his own. He began asking residents, going door to door, trying to find any clue. But the responses he received were always the same. No one had seen Robert. No one knew anything. However, as Juan investigated, he began to notice a pattern. Some people avoided his eyes, others gave evasive answers, as if they had something to hide. It was as if the entire town was involved in a game of secrets, and he was the only one who didn't know the rules. One afternoon, while walking through the town market, an elderly woman approached him. Her face was marked by time, but her eyes showed a sharpness that contrasted with her frail appearance. "You shouldn't trust anyone here," she whispered. "North Hill has its own secrets. Be careful who you talk to." Those words echoed in Juan's mind as he returned home. Something was terribly wrong with that town, and he was determined to find out what it was. He began to follow the few threads of clues he had, and that led him to dark places he never imagined existed. Eventually, Juan learned of an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of the town, hidden amid a dense forest that few dared to visit. They said the place was haunted, that those who entered the forest rarely returned. Driven by desperation and the hope of finding Robert, Juan decided to investigate the place on his own. The walk to the cabin was long and exhausting. The forest seemed to close in around him, as if the trees were alive, watching every move. The wind whispered among the branches, bringing with it indistinct voices that seemed to laugh at his daring. But Juan was not deterred. He knew he was close to something that could bring his son back. When he finally found the cabin, the sight he saw made him stop in his tracks. The structure seemed to have been abandoned in a hurry, with doors and windows wide open, as if someone had fled in the midst of an action. As he entered, Juan realized that the cabin was filled with remnants of a life that shouldn't exist there: clothes, utensils, and even children's toys. But what truly shocked him was what he found in the basement. Robert, tied up and gagged, his face marked by fear and suffering. Juan rushed to his son, untying the bonds with trembling hands. Robert was weak, but alive. Juan's words were muffled by tears of relief, but he knew it wasn't over yet. "Let's get out of here," he whispered, carrying Robert in his arms. On the way back, Juan saw lights approaching through the forest. They were the town's residents, along with reporters he had contacted days earlier, finally responding to his call for help. But the joy of having Robert back was overshadowed by the mystery that still hung over the town. Who had done this to his son? To what extent were the people he had trusted involved? In the days that followed, a series of arrests shook North Hill. It was discovered that the local police were involved in a scheme of human and organ trafficking, using the town as a front for their operations. The revelations shocked Argentina and put North Hill at the center of a national scandal. But despite the arrests, one question remained unanswered: how could an entire town keep such a horrific secret? As Juan tried to rebuild his life with Robert, the mystery of North Hill continued to haunt him. He knew that not all those involved had been captured, that there was more to that town than met the eye. Sometimes, he woke up in the middle of the night, feeling watched. And in his dreams, he saw expressionless faces, eyes that followed him, whispering secrets he could never unravel. North Hill continued its seemingly peaceful life, but for those who knew the truth, the town would never be the same. The evil that lurked in the shadows was still there, waiting for its next opportunity to emerge. And Juan, even after everything, knew that the nightmare was far from over. The mystery remained, wrapped in the dark forests and silent streets of North Hill, where dark secrets hid in plain sight, just waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Story 2. Noah Lockwood grew up in Larkspur, Oregon, a small town where everyone knew each other by name, where doors remained unlocked, and where the biggest event of the year was the Harvest Festival. But Noah's life was never easy. The son of a single mother who struggled to put food on the table and a father who disappeared before he was born, Noah learned the meanings of responsibility and resilience from an early age. He helped his mother as a child, delivering newspapers in the morning before going to school and working at a local workshop in the afternoons. From childhood, Noah dreamed of becoming a police officer. He saw the officers of Larkspur as the protectors of the town, those who ensured that evil stayed beyond the city limits. It was an idealized vision, but it drove him to strive harder. Helping his mother, being a good student, staying out of trouble, all to one day wear that uniform and serve the town he loved. Noah worked hard, sacrificing much to achieve his goal. And when he finally graduated from the police academy, he felt he had achieved more than just a job. He had earned a mission, a reason to keep fighting. The pride in his mother's tired eyes made it all worthwhile. However, despite the apparent tranquility of Larkspur, Noah knew that darkness could lurk even in the most peaceful places. And on that fateful night, darkness showed its true face. It was a cold, foggy night, as if nature itself was trying to hide something. The air felt denser than usual, charged with a tension Noah couldn't identify. He had already responded to several incidents that night: bar fights, neighbors complaining about loud music, and even a lost dog that ended up being found in a house on the other side of town. Nothing special, but something in the atmosphere made Noah feel restless, as if something was about to happen. Then, the radio in his patrol car crackled with urgency he hadn't heard in a long time. A frantic voice, a woman, claimed she had seen someone dragging a body into the old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The warehouse, once the heart of a thriving paper mill, was now just an empty shell, forgotten and wrapped in ghost stories and local legends. The woman's description was vague, but there was something in her voice that made Noah speed his car toward the location. When Noah arrived, the fog seemed even thicker, almost suffocating. He stepped out of the patrol car, flashlight in one hand, the other resting on the gun in his holster. The darkness around the warehouse seemed alive, pulsating as if it was waiting for him. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps on the damp gravel. The warehouse was in ruins, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows broken, looking like the empty eye sockets of a giant skull. The front door was ajar, and Noah felt a chill run down his spine. He pushed the door open carefully, and it creaked as if protesting the intrusion. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rusty machinery, stacks of pallets, and a strong smell of mold. But there was something more. As he moved forward, Noah saw marks on the floor, a dark trail leading to a pile of debris in the corner of the warehouse. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he rounded the pile, he saw the body. It was a woman, barely breathing, her clothes torn and her body covered in blood. She lifted her eyes to Noah, eyes full of terror, and whispered with a weak voice, "He's still here." Before Noah could react, he felt a presence behind him. He turned quickly, and there he was, a tall skeletal figure, with wild eyes that glowed in the flashlight's beam. The man was still, holding a long sharp knife that reflected the light sinisterly. "Police! Drop the knife!" Noah shouted, but the man did not move. He just smiled, a twisted, disturbing smile that sent chills through Noah's blood. The air in the warehouse seemed to close around them, making it hard to breathe. Noah gripped the handle of his gun, hoping the man would surrender. But instead, he took a step forward, brandishing the knife threateningly. The smile disappeared, replaced by a look of pure malice, as if something inside him was changing. Noah tried to stay calm, but every step the man took towards him made his mind scream for him to react. "Drop the knife now." Noah shouted again, but the man did not respond. He suddenly advanced, quick and silent as a shadow. Noah fired, but the shot missed. The man knocked him down, and the two fell to the dirty floor of the warehouse, engaged in a deadly dance. The man's face was so close Noah could see every detail: the dilated eyes, the veins pulsing at his temples, the expression of someone who seemed possessed by an inhuman force. There was something monstrous about him, as if evil itself was present. They rolled on the floor, knocking over debris as they fought. Noah's flashlight slid away, leaving them almost in darkness. But Noah could feel the man's heavy breathing, the sound of desperate footsteps in the darkness. Suddenly, the struggle ceased. Noah managed to pull away, regaining his weapon and aiming it at the man. He was standing again, but this time, he did not attack. Instead he laughed, a laugh that echoed through the warehouse like a sinister whisper. Then, he collapsed to the floor, the knife falling from his hand. Noah approached cautiously, handcuffing the man while calling for backup on the radio. But when he looked into the man's eyes again, something deeply disturbed him. There was no anger, no fear, just a chilling emptiness, as if the man was no longer human. It was as if something inside him had changed during the fight, as if he had been overtaken by a force beyond comprehension. Reinforcements arrived, and the man was taken into custody, still laughing unsettlingly. Noah escorted the injured woman to the ambulance, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew that the man, Mateo Thorne, was more than just a psychopath. There was something in him, something Noah couldn't explain, but that left him with a feeling of unease that wouldn't go away. The days that followed were a blur of interrogations, investigations, and shocking revelations. Mateo Thorne was a serial killer, responsible for several disappearances in the region. The news shook Larkspur, and the small town Noah loved would never be the same again. People who once trusted each other began to look at each other with suspicion, locking their doors and keeping their children closer to home. Mateo was tried and convicted, but for Noah, the story didn't end there. Since that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was stalking him. He began to suffer from insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night with the sensation that there was someone, or something, in his room. He heard inexplicable noises, whispers that seemed to come from within his own mind. The psychological terror that Mateo had unleashed wasn't limited to his crimes. He seemed to have left a mark on Noah, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. There were nights when Noah wondered if he had really defeated the true enemy that night, or if something much worse had escaped. And then there were the dreams. Dreams in which Mateo Thorne was always present, but different. His voice changed, his face transformed, as if he was a puppet controlled by something beyond this world. And in the final moments of each dream, Mateo smiled, that twisted empty smile that made Noah wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. The doctors said it was just trauma, that he needed time to recover. But Noah knew it was more than that. Something had been unleashed that night, something he couldn't understand, but that was always there, lurking on the periphery of his vision, in the darkest corner of his mind. The inexplicable noises continued. The sensations of being watched, of being followed, that at any moment Mateo Thorne might appear in a dark corner or in a reflection in a mirror. Noah began to avoid mirrors. The shadows terrified him, and he grew wary of being alone at home for long periods. Each noise in the house, each movement of the shadows, made his heart race and his senses go on high alert. He tried to ignore these sensations, attributing them to stress and fatigue, but deep down, he knew something had changed inside him that night in the warehouse. The nights became endless. Noah began to notice that the line between reality and nightmare was becoming increasingly thin. He saw Mateo Thorne in his dreams, but he also began to see him during the day, at the most unexpected moments. On the street, in the reflection of a shop window, in the window of the car next to him. Each appearance was brief, fleeting, but it left Noah paralyzed with fear, questioning his sanity. He tried to talk about it with some colleagues, but the responses were always the same: "You need to rest, Noah." It was a tough case, it's normal to be shaken up. But for Noah, it didn't feel normal. He knew Mateo Thorne was locked up, but the sensation that something was very wrong did not disappear. Time passed, and Noah began to isolate himself. Meetings with friends became less frequent, and he avoided places he used to frequent regularly. The only thing he could do without feeling the constant presence of Mateo was work. At work, Noah focused on his tasks, on keeping the town safe. But even there, Mateo's shadow was present, lurking in the dark corners of the police station, whispering in his mind. One night, while on duty, Noah received a strange call. The voice on the other end of the line was weak, almost inaudible, but familiar. "He's still here, Noah." The voice was that of the woman he had rescued in the warehouse. But before he could respond, the line went dead. Noah rushed to the hospital where the woman was admitted, but when he arrived, she was already dead. The medical team informed him that she had succumbed to her injuries, but Noah couldn't ignore the fact that there was something more to that death. Something he couldn't explain. After that, the appearances of Mateo Thorne became more frequent and more intense. He appeared in mirrors, smiling with that twisted smile, his eyes glowing with an inhuman madness. Noah began to question whether it was all real, or if he was losing his sanity. He remembered what he had seen in the warehouse, the figures drawn with blood on the walls, as if they were part of a macabre ritual. He began to wonder if Mateo Thorne was just a man or if there was something more, something that had infiltrated his life and was now relentlessly pursuing him. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Noah decided to face his fears. He took his gun and went to the abandoned warehouse, the place where it all began. The town was enveloped in a dense fog, the silence oppressive. Each step he took towards the warehouse made the air feel heavier, as if something was trying to stop him from moving forward. When he entered the warehouse, everything was as he remembered it: the rusty machines, the stacks of pallets, the smell of mold and decay. But there was something more. The blood figures on the walls, which had been cleaned by the police, were back, clearer and more horrible than before. They seemed to pulse, as if they were alive. Noah followed the trail of his own memories to the corner where he had found the injured woman. And there, in the same place, was Mateo Thorne. He shouldn't have been there, he was locked up. But there he was, looking directly at Noah, his eyes burning with wild fury. "I told you you couldn't stop me, Noah." Mateo's voice was different, distorted, almost supernatural. He advanced towards Noah, but this time, Noah did not back down. He felt a rush of adrenaline, a mix of fear and determination. He knew he had to end it, once and for all. Noah raised his gun, but Mateo didn't stop. He kept advancing, his form changing, his features distorting into something monstrous. Noah fired, but the bullet passed right through, as if Mateo was made of shadows. Noah stepped back, feeling despair rise within him. But then, something unexpected happened. The figures on the walls began to glow, emitting a faint but steady light. Mateo suddenly stopped, as if something was holding him back. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the light around the figures grew more intense. Noah watched as Mateo writhed, his body dissolving into shadows that were sucked into the figures on the walls. And then, everything went silent. The warehouse was empty. The blood figures on the walls disappeared, and the only thing Noah could hear was his own panting breath. He was alone. Mateo Thorne had vanished. Noah left the warehouse, feeling drained, but somehow relieved. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew Mateo wouldn't return. The sensation of being watched, of being followed, also disappeared. The town of Larkspur slowly began to recover, but the scars remained, both in the community and in Noah. The mystery of Mateo Thorne and the figures in the warehouse was never resolved, and Noah never managed to explain what really happened that night. But he knew that, in some way, he had faced something beyond human comprehension. Something that had changed him forever. Even so, Noah found new strength within himself. He returned to work, more determined than ever to protect the town he loved. And although the shadows of the past still followed him, he knew that as long as he continued fighting, there would always be light at the end of the tunnel. But on quiet nights, when the fog descended over Larkspur, Noah could still hear a distant whisper, coming from the abandoned warehouse. A whisper that reminded him that evil never completely disappears. It just waits in the shadows, for the right moment to return. Story 3 Harlington, a small town nestled in the mountains of West Virginia, always had an air of mystery hovering over its narrow streets and ancient mansions. It was a place where time seemed to have stopped, where residents had known each other for generations, and where secrets were kept with almost reverential silence. The town had a strange reputation, known for its dark legends and chilling stories, especially surrounding the Cooper Mansion. The Cooper Mansion, a Gothic and imposing building, sat atop a hill on the outskirts of town, dominating the landscape with its sinister presence. Built in the 19th century, The mansion was a reflection of the grandeur and power the Cooper family had once flaunted. However, after a tragic incident involving the last heir of the family, the mansion was abandoned, becoming a symbol of decay and darkness. The residents of Harlington avoided the mansion, speaking softly about what had happened there, as if the very walls of the building could listen. The most well-known story was that of the former resident, Charles Cooper, who was found dead in his office, the doors and windows locked from the inside, with no signs of struggle. His death was officially declared a suicide, but few believed this version. Whispers said that something darker was at play, something that the living should not challenge. James Lennox, one of the few police officers in Harlington, knew the stories well but always treated them as nothing more than superstition. He was a practical man, dedicated to his job, and not easily shaken by local legends. His partner Oliver shared this skepticism, and together, they formed a reliable duo at the town's police station. One night, Harlington was seized by a restlessness that James could not ignore. The town was quieter than usual, as if something was lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. A dense fog covered the streets, making the night even more oppressive. Then the call came, a report of strange activity at the Cooper mansion. Oliver, sitting next to James in the patrol car, gave him a look that mixed surprise and skepticism. "It's just some kid trying to pull a prank," Oliver said, trying to dispel the tension that was starting to build in the air. But James felt there was something more that night. Something that could not be easily dismissed. They arrived at the mansion shortly after midnight. The fog enveloped the building, making the mansion seem to float on a sea of shadows. The facade was worn by time, the broken windows resembling empty eyes watching the intruders. A feeling of discomfort grew in James as they approached the entrance. He was not a superstitious man, but he could not deny the feeling that something was wrong. The main door was ajar, a detail that made James's heart beat faster. He drew his flashlight and pushed the door, which creaked as if protesting the intrusion. The interior of the mansion was plunged into darkness, the walls covered with mold, and the floorboards creaking under their feet. But what caught James's attention most was the smell, a mix of mold, dust, and something else. Something metallic and putrid. "Let's take a look and get out of here," Oliver said, trying to keep his voice steady. But James noticed the nervousness in his partner. They moved through the narrow corridors, the beams of their flashlights revealing only fragments of what had once been a luxurious home. As they advanced, James began to notice marks on the walls, drawings made with something that looked like dried blood. They were symbols he did not recognize, but which emanated a sense of unease. "Do you see this, Oliver?" James asked, his voice almost a whisper. Oliver nodded, but said nothing. The marks continued, leading them to a large hall in the center of the mansion. In the hall, they found Elias Trent. The man was kneeling on the floor, muttering to himself, surrounded by candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The candles partially illuminated the symbols on the floor, forming a circle around Elias. James felt a chill run down his spine when he realized that the drawings on the floor were even more complex and disturbing than those on the walls. "Elias Trent, get up and step away from the candles," James ordered, his voice firm. Elias slowly lifted his head, his eyes shining with an insane intensity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice deep and hoarse. "You don't understand what's happening. He's coming." Oliver stepped forward, trying to move Elias away from the circle, but the man began to laugh, a laugh that made the hairs on James's neck stand up. "You can't stop him," Elias continued. "He's already here." Before James could react, Elias lunged at Oliver, pushing him out of the circle. James rushed to help his partner, but something in the hall seemed to be holding him back, as if an invisible force was trying to prevent him from intervening. He struggled against the sensation, drawing his gun and aiming it at Elias. "Calm down, Elias," James shouted, trying to maintain control of the situation. But Elias seemed not to hear. He continued to murmur incomprehensible words, his voice changing in tone, becoming almost inhuman. James managed to reach Oliver, and together they subdued Elias, handcuffing him with effort. But the feeling of discomfort remained. There was something about those symbols, something about the mansion itself, that seemed to be alive, pulsing with an evil energy. They took Elias back to the police station, where he was placed in a cell. The night was long, and James could barely sleep, haunted by Elias's words and the symbols in the mansion. The next morning, when he and Oliver returned to the station, they discovered that Elias had disappeared from his cell. The security cameras showed nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The town was in shock. How could Elias, an insane and dangerous man, have simply disappeared? The search for him stretched on for weeks, but there was no sign of him until his body was found in the woods on the outskirts of town, in an advanced state of decomposition. The autopsy revealed he had been dead for weeks, long before he had been taken into custody. But this made no sense. How could he have died before disappearing from the cell? The news of Elias's death brought a new wave of fear to the town. People began to talk about the disappearances that had occurred over the years, all seemingly linked to the Cooper mansion. No one knew for sure how many people had disappeared, but everyone agreed that something very wrong was happening. James and Oliver continued to investigate, but the more they delved into the case, the more uncomfortable they became. They discovered that the mansion had been the site of dark rituals for generations, and that the Cooper family had been deeply involved in occult practices. The people of the town, though they never spoke openly about it, seemed to know more than they let on. There was a strange habit among the residents of Harlington. They locked themselves in their homes at dawn, saying that bad things happened during the day. James had never paid much attention to this behavior. He always worked at night and thought it was just a silly superstition. But now, after everything he had seen, he began to wonder if there was something more. Perhaps the town was hiding secrets he could never imagine. Days passed, but James could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. He began to notice movements in the corner of his eye, shadows that disappeared when he tried to look directly at them. His home, which had always been a refuge, now felt cold and strange, as if something or someone was there with him. Oliver was also different. He became more reserved, quieter. The jokes and laughter they had once shared were replaced by uncomfortable silences. Both knew that something had changed, that something dark was lurking in the town. Then one night, while James was reviewing reports at the police station, he heard a sound he would never forget, a faint whisper, coming from the hall where Elias had been held. He rose slowly, his hand instinctively going to the gun in his holster. The sound continued, as if someone was murmuring words he could not understand. He approached the hall, each step making his heart beat faster. When he opened the door, the sound stopped. The cell where Elias had disappeared was empty, but something in the air felt different. James felt a chill run down his spine, and suddenly, he saw a reflection in the mirror in the corner. It was Elias's face, smiling sinisterly, his eyes shining with that same insanity he had seen in the mansion. James turned quickly, but the cell was empty. He blinked, trying to process what he had just seen, but the reflection had already disappeared. The cell looked ordinary, with nothing unusual. But James knew that something was there, something he could not explain. That night, James returned home, but sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elias's smile, felt his presence around him. He knew that the mansion and the recent events had awakened something that should not have been disturbed. Weeks passed, but the sensation of being watched never disappeared. The disappearances continued, and the town of Harlington sank even deeper into its unsettling silence. James and Oliver continued to investigate, but they knew they were facing something beyond their comprehension. James began to wonder if the entire town was under some kind of curse, a curse that dated back to the origins of the Cooper mansion. There was something in those rituals, something in the symbols he had seen, that haunted him. Perhaps the town was trapped in an endless cycle of darkness, where evil could never be truly eradicated. Harlington would never be the same. People began to move away, leaving behind the town and its dark secrets. But James knew he could not simply leave. He was part of that town, part of that mystery that consumed him day after day. And so he continued, patrolling the streets of Harlington, always alert to the shadows, to the whispers that came from the dark. He knew that evil was still there, waiting for the right moment to return. And in his heart, he knew that when the sun rose again over Harlington, something terrible might happen. The town of Harlington remained silent, its secrets buried deep in the shadows. But James Lennox knew that the truth could never be fully hidden. It was there, in the walls of the Cooper mansion, in the eyes of the residents, in the very soil of the town. And so, he continued his vigil, waiting, fearing, and preparing for the inevitable return of the evil that had awakened in the Cooper mansion. Story 4. The small town of Randall, Oklahoma, was always known for its tranquility. With its dusty streets and friendly residents, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played until sunset. Sasha D'Amato, a local police officer who knew every corner of the town, felt at peace with the life he led. There was a certain security in knowing that most of his job involved resolving domestic disputes or handling traffic violations. But all that changed abruptly and disturbingly. It was an unbearably hot summer, one that made the air vibrate with the intensity of the heat. Sasha was in his patrol car, trying to stay awake as the sun scorched the asphalt. The police radio buzzed with a new call, and the voice on the other end sounded as weary as he felt. "Sasha, we have a situation in County 27. Possible 1054. Sasha frowned. A possible body. That wasn't something you often heard about in Randall. With his heart racing, he turned on the siren and headed to the location. As he approached, he saw an old Chevy pickup parked awkwardly by the roadside, half hidden by tall grass. Something about the scene already seemed off. He got out of the car, his hand instinctively resting on the gun in his holster. Approaching the pickup, he saw that the driver's door was open and a man was slumped over the steering wheel. "Sandy, are you okay?" Sasha shouted, already knowing the man's identity before even checking his documents. Sandy Callahan was a local farmer, known to be a loner but never someone who got into trouble. As Sasha opened the pickup door, the smell of death hit him. Sandy's face was pale, his eyes fixed, lifeless. Sasha called for an ambulance, and while waiting for the paramedics, he noticed something strange. The back of Sandy's head had a small puncture wound, as if he had been stabbed with something sharp. The detail disturbed Sasha. This wasn't a common accident, it was murder. The news spread quickly through Randall, shocking the community. But the worst was yet to come. A few days later, Joanna Higgins, a local teacher, disappeared without a trace. Sasha felt the weight of responsibility growing on his shoulders. Randall had never faced anything like this, and now, he was dealing with two frightening and unanswered cases. The investigation into Sandy Callahan's death and Joanna Higgins' disappearance seemed endless. Sasha began to visit Sandy's farm regularly, hoping to find some clue that could link the two cases. Sandy's house was isolated, surrounded by vast fields and an old barn that seemed not to have been used for years. Everything seemed normal, until Sasha found a small silver pocket knife in the barn, the kind of object Sandy would not carry. Something was very wrong. However, it was only when the forensic lab found fingerprints on the knife that the truth began to emerge. The prints belonged to Jonathan Green, a man with a violent past, known for petty thefts and assaults in neighboring towns. Sasha knew he was dealing with someone dangerous, but what he discovered next was far more disturbing than he could have imagined. Jonathan was found and brought to the Randall police station. He was a thin man, with a crooked smile and shifty eyes that never stopped moving. When Sasha began the interrogation, Jonathan appeared surprisingly calm, almost indifferent. He admitted to killing Sandy Callahan, but not for a rational reason. His confession was a tangle of incoherent words, mixing resentment with a need to offer something to a greater force. "You don't understand, Sasha," Jonathan said, his voice taking on a chilling tone. "Sandy knew too much. He was in the way. And Joanna? Well, she saw something she shouldn't have seen. I couldn't let them live. But it wasn't me who decided. He told me what to do. Sasha felt a chill hearing those words. He who, Jonathan? Who told you what to do? Jonathan laughed, a dry, empty sound. You would never understand. But I'm not alone. I've never been. He's always here with me. And even if you lock me up, he will continue. The investigation took an even darker turn when Jonathan began to talk about strange rituals he performed on Sandy's farm. He spoke of weird symbols, about blood, and about a sacrifice needed to appease an entity he believed had been haunting Randall for generations. Jonathan described details that made Sasha nauseous, the kind of horror that shouldn't exist outside of horror stories. He's always here, Jonathan repeated, his eyes fixed on a distant point in the interrogation room. I can feel his presence. He's waiting for me, and when I die, he will take me, but I will come back. Always come back. Jonathan was sentenced to life in prison, but his words continued to echo in Sasha's mind. Randall had never faced anything like this, and the town was never the same. Residents began locking their doors more frequently, and the air seemed heavier, as if something dark hovered over the town. Sasha too was affected. He began to have recurring nightmares, where he saw Jonathan, not as the man he had arrested, but as a distorted figure, a shadow with glowing eyes that chased him night after night. He began to feel that something was wrong with him, as if the evil Jonathan had invoked was now trying to find him. And then, things started to happen. Unexplained sounds echoed through Sasha's house at night, whispers he couldn't decipher, but which woke him up sweating cold. The lights flickered, and shadows seemed to move in the corner of his vision, disappearing when he tried to focus on them. On one particularly disturbing night, Sasha woke from one of those nightmares and, looking in the bathroom mirror, saw something that made his heart stop. Reflected beside him was Jonathan, with that same crooked smile and eyes shining with a light that wasn't of this world. Sasha blinked, and the figure disappeared, but the panic remained. He began to wonder if he was going crazy. The case had ended, Jonathan was locked up, but the terror hadn't. The sensation of being watched, of being hunted by something he couldn't see, was always present. Jonathan's words echoed in his mind, I always come back. Randall continued its life, but the community never fully recovered. People whispered about the events of that summer, about how something dark had been awakened in the town. Sasha tried to continue with his life, but he knew something had changed forever. He began to avoid dark places, the quiet streets of the town at night, and even mirrors. But deep down, he knew the fight hadn't ended. The evil that Jonathan had invoked was still out there waiting. And Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that eventually, he would have to face it again. But next time, not as a police officer, but as someone who was being hunted. The mystery in Randall was never really solved. Jonathan's words, his crooked smile, and the dark presence he claimed was by his side, left an indelible mark on Sasha and the entire town. People said justice had been served, but Sasha knew, deep in his heart, that the true horror was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to return. And so, he lived with the constant sensation of being watched, as if Jonathan's shadow had never left him. The town might have moved on, but for Sasha, the terror continued, a nightmare he couldn't escape, a story he feared would never end. Story 5. North Hill, a small town in Maine, always had an air of mystery that hovered over its rolling hills and quiet streets. The residents spoke in whispers about inexplicable events, unsolved disappearances, and shadows that moved at the edge of their vision. It was a place where the silence of the night seemed to hide secrets that no one dared to reveal, and where fear took deep root in the minds of those who dared to question.
William, a police officer in North Hill, knew these stories well. He had grown up hearing tales from his parents and grandparents about people who disappeared while out for a morning jog, children who never returned from school, and neighbors who simply vanished from their backyards. These stories haunted him since childhood, but like most residents, he preferred to believe they were just legends. Now, as a police officer, it was his responsibility to maintain peace in the town, and he took pride in his work. But in the summer of 2023, something began to change. The number of disappearances increased, and a growing sense of dread took over the town. It seemed that the darkness that had always lurked in the shadows of North Hill was finally beginning to manifest. Determined to uncover the truth, William initiated an investigation that would lead him into unimaginable nightmare. It all started with the disappearance of a young woman named Emily Hayes. She had gone out for a run on a sunny morning and never returned. Her family was desperate, and the entire town was mobilized to search for her but despite everyone's efforts, there was no sign of Emily. It was as if she had been swallowed by the earth itself. A few days later, a second person vanished, a 10-year-old boy named Michael, who was returning home from school. He was last seen in his backyard, where his mother was waiting for him on the porch. She heard the gate open, but when she turned around, he was there. The toys he had been carrying were dropped on the ground, but Michael had disappeared. Panic began to spread through the town, and rumors, once just whispers, became screams of fear. People talked about the Bone Collector, a dark figure from local legends, a man who supposedly kidnapped people for his macabre purposes. William, naturally skeptical, refused to believe these stories, but as the disappearances piled up, he could no longer ignore the sinister pattern that was emerging. The residents seemed to know more than they were willing to share. At every corner, William saw furtive glances, people whispering among themselves, and always, that palpable fear. It was as if everyone knew something but were too terrified to speak. And this conspiracy of silence only ignited the sense that something very wrong was happening. Then, William's investigation led him to a horrific discovery. On a cold, cloudy afternoon, he received an anonymous tip that guided him to a remote area of the forest where, after hours of searching, he found a hidden entrance to an underground bunker. The site was concealed by layers of vegetation, almost imperceptible to the unobservant eye. The discomfort was almost unbearable as he approached. With the help of other officers, William managed to force entry into the bunker. What they found inside was the stuff of nightmares. The walls of the bunker were covered with pentagrams drawn with dried blood, symbols of rituals that no one could decipher. There was a ave, filled with a metallic nauseating cell. There were bars, or what remained of them, scattered across the floor. Some were piled in corners, others inside large industrial refrigerators, unidentifiable. But what terrified William the most was the table they found at the center of the bunker. A meal was laid out with almost ceremonial precision, and he did not need much time to realize that the meat served was not animal. It was human flesh. The horror overwhelmed them as they explored the bunker. In one of the rooms, they found a man still alive, chained to the wall, mumbling incoherent words, his eyes glazed and skin covered in scars. He was one of the victims who had been reported missing over 10 years ago, and to everyone's shock, William discovered that this man was the brother of his best friend, who had spent years searching for his missing sister. The connection was devastating. The brother he had been searching for was just meters away, all that time, being tortured and kept captive while the Bone Collector pretended to be innocent, helping in the searches and consoling the family. But the Bone Collector, as William soon discovered, was not an ordinary man. He was a cunning predator who knew how to blend in, how to hide his intentions, and most importantly, how to play with people's minds. When he was finally captured, he appeared calm, almost content, as if everything had gone exactly as he planned. During the interrogation, he confessed to the crimes with a disturbing smile on his lips, but his words made little sense. He spoke of necessary sacrifices, of a hunger he had to feed, and of a greater force that guided him. But what disturbed William the most was when the Bone Collector said, with chilling serenity, that he was not alone. "He's always with me," the man said. "His eyes shining with uncontrollable madness. I am just his instrument, and when he die, he will find another. He always does." The words echoed in William's mind, leaving him uneasy, but the case seemed closed. The collector was sentenced to life in prison, but not before causing irreparable damage to the North Hill community. The families of the victims were devastated, and the town, once known for its tranquility, become a place of fear and mistrust. But the mystery did not end with the collector's arrest. In the days that followed, William began to notice that the terror lurking in the town had not disappeared. He began to notice movements in the shadows, hard whispers in the silence of the night, and saw reflections in the mirror that did not correspond to his own image. There was something more, something that the collector had awakened and that now seemed to be lurking, waiting for its next victim. The residents of North Hill began to avoid talking about the events of that summer, trying to move on, but the fear was palpable. People locked their doors and windows, and the streets, once full of life, were now deserted at dusk. William, for his part, began to be haunted by nightmares where he saw the collector's face, always smiling, always waiting. And, deep in his mind, the question referred the most loom over him like a
shadow. Had the true evil of North Hill really been captured? Or was it just waiting for the right time to return? The feeling of being watched, of being targeted by something he could not see, constantly accompanied him. Investigations into the rituals in the bunker led nowhere concrete, and experts who were called to study the symbols and objects found at the site left disturbed and without answers. Some said the place was cursed, that an evil presence still inhabited the bunker, while others refused to return, claiming they had felt something inexplicable. William began to avoid the place, but he knew the mystery of North Hill was far from being solved. The town had changed forever, and so had he. The shadows that once seemed part of horror stories were now a reality he could not ignore. The bone collector's case was officially closed, but for William, the real battle was just beginning. He knew the evil was still out there, waiting in the shadows, and any moment it might return. Every day that passed, the feeling of dread grew, and he wondered if he would ever be able to escape the terror that had been unleashed in North Hill. But until then, all William could do was continue patrolling the streets of the town, trying to protect the residents from whatever was waiting in the shadows, and praying that the terror that haunted North Hill would not return to claim new victims. And so, the town continued to live in the shadow of fear, knowing that although the collector had been captured, the true evil might never be contained. William continued his routine, but the tranquility he once felt in North Hill had been replaced by a constant tension. The bone collector's case, although technically resolved, had left deep marks, not just on the town, but on his very soul. He found himself revisiting the details of the bunker in his mind. The pentagrams, the stacked bodies, the human flesh served as a grotesque meal. Each detail was like a scar on his psyche, a reminder of the horror he had witnessed. Nights became particularly difficult. William, who had always slept deeply, now found himself awake in the darkest hours of the morning, listening to the oppressive silence that seemed to hide something. The sound of the wind in the trees outside his house, the creaking of the floorboards, all seemed amplified, laden with a sinister meaning. He began to avoid mirrors, fearing to see something in them that shouldn't be there, a reflection, a movement, perhaps the face of the collector or something even worse. People in the town continued their lives, but the change was evident. No one went out after dusk, and the empty streets reinforced the sense that something was fundamentally wrong. Conversations in public places were brief, fraught with a caution that hadn't existed before. There was fear in the eyes of the residents, and William knew he was not immune to that fear. One day, while William was at the police station reviewing old reports, a sense of déjà vu hit him hard. He found himself back in the bunker, the smell of decomposing meat and coagulated blood invading his nostrils as if he was really there. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away the memories, but they came back more vividly. He decided that he needed to investigate further, to find out what really lay behind the case. Something inside him said the terror was far from over. He began to review the files of the victims, looking for any connection that might have been overlooked. Then, something caught his attention. There was a pattern in the disappearances that he hadn't noticed before. The victims weren't just random. Many of them had some connection to old legends and stories of North Hill. There were mentions of an ancient entity, a figure that supposedly roamed the town for centuries, demanding sacrifices from time to time. William decided to visit the survivors, those who had been rescued from the bunker. He wanted to learn more about what they had experienced, to try to understand what the collector was trying to achieve with his rituals. But what he found was even more disturbing. The survivors were deeply traumatized, many unable to speak about what they had gone through. Those who could talk mentioned voices in the darkness, whispers that promised release in exchange for their obedience. One of them, his eyes filled with terror, told William he's not dead. He's waiting. He always waits. These words haunted William. He began to realize that the collector wasn't just a serial killer, but someone who was trying to fulfill a darker purpose, something he believed to be larger than himself. The mentions of the rituals, the pentagrams, the sacrifices, all seemed to point to an attempt to invoke or appease a malevolent force. One sleepless night, William decided to return to the bunker. He needed to see the place again, to find answers that might explain what was happening in North Hill. He took his gun, a flashlight, and drove to the forest where the bunker was hidden. The path through the forest was dark and silent, every sound amplified by the lack of light. When he finally reached the bunker, the feeling of discomfort hit him full force. He descended the concrete steps, the beam of light from his flashlight trembling in his hand. The walls of the bunker felt colder than before, as if the very structure was imbued with malice. When he reached the main hall, where the table with the meal had been found, he felt a sudden chill, a shiver that ran down his spine. The hall was empty, but something was different. The candles, which had been removed by the police, were back, arranged in the same way. In the center of the hall, where there had once been a table, now there was a circle drawn on the floor, filled with symbols that William did not recognize. In the center of the circle, something glinted in the light of the flashlight, a piece of metal, similar to an ancient key. William hesitated, instinct telling him to leave, but something compelled him to continue. He picked up the key, and the moment he touched it, a sense of vertigo overwhelmed him. It was as if time and space had distorted around him. The hall seemed to spin, and he heard whispers, hundreds of them, all at once, filling his mind with incomprehensible words. When the sensation finally passed, William was on his knees, breathing heavily. The hall was quiet again, but he knew something had changed. He felt that he was no longer alone in that place. He pocketed the key and, with a superhuman effort, left the bunker, feeling the weight of evil that seemed to cling to him. Back in his police car, William couldn't stop shaking. He knew he had touched something that should not have been disturbed, something that did not belong in this world. The key in his pocket seemed to pulse, radiating a dark energy that he could not ignore. In the days that followed, the sensation of being watched intensified. William began to notice shadows moving at the edge of his peripheral vision, whispers that came from nowhere and disappeared as quickly as they appeared. He avoided dark places, but he knew that wouldn't help. Something was following him, something that had been awakened by the collector and was now after him. The disappearances in North Hill stopped, but the terror remained. William knew the town was on the brink of something terrible, something he had inadvertently helped to unleash. The key, the rituals, the symbols, all seemed to be part of a macabre puzzle that he still couldn't fully understand. He started to investigate the local legends more deeply, talking to the few residents who still remembered the old stories. What he discovered was terrifying. North Hill had been founded on lands considered sacred by native tribes, a place where it was believed that the barriers between this world and the next were thin. There was a story about a spirit that demanded sacrifices, and that if not appeased, would bring destruction to all. William didn't know if he believed in spirits, but he couldn't deny what was happening around him. He knew he had to do something, but what? The key he had found in the bunker seemed to be the central piece of it all, but how to use it, or even if he should use it, was a mystery. Days turned into weeks, and the fear inside him grew. William knew time was running out. Something was coming, something he didn't know how to stop. The key, the symbols, the disappearances, all were connected to an ancient evil, an evil that was now about to fully manifest. Then, on a moonless night, while William was at home, he heard a sound that made him freeze with fear. It was the sound of footsteps downstairs, heavy footsteps that didn't belong to anyone he knew. He grabbed his gun and slowly descended the stairs, each step increasing his anxiety. The sound stopped when he reached the bottom of the stairs, but the sense of a malevolent presence remained. And there, in the middle of the room, where it had been empty before, now there was a circle drawn on the floor, similar to the one in the bunker. And inside the circle, the key he had found, glowing with a faint, sinister light. William knew at that moment there was no turning back. He had been marked, chosen for something he didn't fully understand, and now he would have to face what was coming. But he also knew he was not alone. The evil that lurked in the shadows was always waiting, and if he didn't do something, North Hill, and perhaps he himself, would be doomed. The mystery of North Hill was far from being solved, but William was determined to discover the truth, even if it led him to the depths of madness and terror. The story of William and the mystery of North Hill did not end there. The evil that had been released still lurked, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And as long as the key remained in his possession, he knew it was only a matter of time before the true terror manifested, bringing with it the destruction he so feared. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you've ever had a supernatural experience, don't keep it to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the inexplicable, fuel the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe together we can unravel these mysteries that float like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always just one narrative away. And now, as night falls, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper yet another true horror story.